when you just glance at the calendar hanging on your wall or like the digital date at the top of your phone screen, there is this unspoken contract between you and reality.
Oh, yeah, completely. You just trust it.
Right. You trust it implicitly. The little box says it's the 15th, and so you accept without a second thought that humanity has just successfully bolted this perfect grid over the cosmos.
I mean, we really do. We point at that number and say, well, that is where we are in time.
Yeah, you expect this total engineering level precision.
It is entirely binary in our modern minds. We need it to be Tuesday or Wednesday. There is no in-between, and there's no room for the sun to be slightly out of position relative to what our paper grid dictates. It's a deeply ingrained psychological comfort.
But then you step into the world of Elizabethan astronomy, and you start looking at secret mathematical codes and this fierce political warfare over how time itself is structured, and suddenly that comforting calendar on your wall looks like a shattered, totally unreliable mechanism.
Yeah, it really does.
The historical landscape we are stepping into today is incredibly murky. It's filled with these diagnostic muddy waters where time was literally falling apart.
And falling apart is not an exaggeration. We're looking at an era where the seasons were visibly drifting away from the dates assigned to them.
Which is exactly what we are unpacking today for you, our listener. We are taking you into a mind-bending intersection of 16th century science, radical calendar reform, and the hidden architecture of some of the most famous literature ever penned.
It's a huge topic.
It is. The mission of this deep dive is strictly focused on unraveling the genius of a man named Dr. John Dee, specifically his proposed 33-year calendar cycle.
Right.
We're going to explore the mechanics of why his calendar was astronomically superior to the one we use today. And then we are going to look at how its precise mathematics form a hidden geometric blueprint inside Shakespeare's sonnets.
And we are working from an incredibly eclectic stack of sources to do this. I mean, we have historical calendrical documents, treatises on John Dee's imperial science, and a fascinating array of complex cryptological tables.
Which look insane when you first glance them.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
The sources refer to these as the true and mathematical documents, and they detail the exact numeric relationships hidden inside the 14-tiered structure of the sonnets.
So I promise you this is going to be an aha journey. We are completely avoiding overwhelming academic jargon, but we are going incredibly deep into the numbers.
You kind of have to get it.
Yeah, and to understand the numbers, we have to start with the physical problem of the sun. Because in the 16th century, humanity had a major crisis on its hands. Time was slipping, and everyone knew it.
To understand the panic this caused, we had to look back at the standard of the time, which was the Julian calendar.
Right.
This was adopted by the Roman Catholic Church at the Council of Nicaea back in 325 A.D. And for centuries, it was the rhythm of the Western world. But it possessed a fatal mathematical flaw.
Which was the leap year rule, right?
Exactly. The Julian leap year rule, adding a day every 4 years without exception, was slightly too generous.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I'm visualizing this right. They were adding too much time into the calendar year compared to what the Earth was physically doing as it orbited the sun.
That is the core of the issue. The Julian calendar year averaged out to 365.25 days. But the actual astronomical solar year, the time it takes the Earth to return to the exact same point in its orbit, specifically, from one vernal equinox to the next, is shorter. It is roughly 365.24238 days. Because the Julian system added slightly too many fractional days over the centuries, the human calendar began to run faster than the solar system.
So the date of the vernal equinox, the first day of spring, was slowly sliding backward on the calendar, or rather, the calendar dates were drifting toward summer.
Exactly. By the 1500s, this drift had accumulated to the point where the calendar was off by 10 or 11 days.
Wow, 10 days is a lot.
It's huge. Now, if you are a farmer, this is incredibly annoying. But if you are the Roman Catholic Church, this is a theological catastrophe.
Why the church specifically?
Because the date of Easter is the major anchor for the entire Christian liturgical year.
Oh, right, because Easter is calculated based on astronomy, right? It is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox.
Yes, it is intimately tied to the vernal equinox. If your equinox is slipping by nearly 2 weeks, your holiest day of the year is completely untethered from its cosmic foundations.
That's a huge problem.
The church found itself in a position where they were celebrating Easter at the wrong time relative to the cosmos. It was a massive embarrassment. So Pope Gregory III, acting on the momentum of the Council of Trent, stepped in to fix it.
And this is where the calendar we use today comes from, the Gregorian calendar.
Implemented by a papal bull in 1582, The Pope's fix was essentially a massive 400-year cycle designed to trim the mathematical fat off the Julian system.
How did that work exactly?
The new rule was you have a leap year every 4 years, except for years evenly divisible by 100, unless they are also divisible by 400.
Oh, which is why the year 2000 was a leap year, but 1900 was not.
Exactly. It was a very clever, functional patch. It kept the equinoxes relatively stable over 4 centuries, and the Pope ordered all Catholic countries to adopt it immediately. They literally skipped 10 days in October 1582 to realign the calendar with the sun.
Just erased 10 days from history. But this is where the geopolitical drama explodes off the pages of our sources, because England looks at this papal decree and essentially laughs.
You have to remember the political climate. England had broken from the Roman Catholic Church in 1534 under King Henry VIII.
Right.
By the time Pope Gregory tries to fix the calendar, Queen Elizabeth I is on the throne. The Anglican Church is established. The Spanish Armada is looming on the horizon. The last thing Queen Elizabeth is going to do is accept a papal mandate regarding how her empire keeps time.
I mean, to accept the Gregorian calendar would be a tacit admission that the Pope still had authority over English daily life.
Exactly the opposite of what she wanted to project. The English bishops argued fiercely against it. They needed to fix the slipping equinox just like everyone else, but they absolutely refused to adopt a Catholic calendar.
So they needed their own fix.
Yes, they needed a Protestant solution, a uniquely English, astronomically sound alternative that proved they didn't need run to understand the universe.
Which brings us to Dr. John Dee. When you look up John Dee in standard history books, you usually get, like, the mystic, the crystal gazer, the guy supposedly talking to angels.
Right, the occultist.
Yeah. But the sources we are pulling from today highlight a completely different side of him. They show him as a highly rigorous mathematician, a leading astronomer, and a crucial advisor to Queen Elizabeth.
He was perhaps the preeminent scientific mind of the English Renaissance. I mean, he possessed one of the largest personal libraries in all of Europe. He was doing hardcore navigational mathematics and advocating for the expansion of the British Empire.
So he's the heavyweight.
Absolutely. When the Queen needed a solution to the calendar crisis that would outsmart the Pope, John Dee was the man she called.
And his solution is what we are going to tear into now because it is brilliant. Instead of the Pope's massive, somewhat clunky 400-year cycle, Dee proposes a much tighter, more culturally resonant cycle, 33 years.
The sources emphasize that Dee did not just pick 33 out of thin air. It is profoundly symbolic.
How so?
Well, 33 years is the traditional lifespan of Jesus Christ. Dee's argument was that a calendar based on the physical life of Christ would be infinitely more appealing to the Protestant world, and even to Catholics, than an arbitrary 400-year rule invented by a modern pope.
Okay, let's break down the actual mechanics of this 33-year cycle. Because the rule for calculating a leap year in Dee's system, the mathematical mechanism, it sounds a bit bizarre at first glance.
It does.
But once you visualize it, it is incredibly elegant.
The rule is highly specific. In Dee's calendar, a year is a leap year, if and only if the year number, when divided by 33, leaves a non-zero remainder that is a perfect multiple of 4.
Okay, let's walk through this carefully with an example for you listening, because this is where the engineering really shines. Let's take the year 2012.
Okay, if you take 2012 and divide by 33, you get 60, with a remainder of 32.
Right, 60 times 33 is 1980. So the difference between 2012 and 1980 is our remainder 32.
Now, apply the second half of Dee's rule to that remainder. Is 32 a non-zero number? Yes. Is it a perfect multiple of 4? Yes, 4 times 8 is 32. Therefore, in John Dee's system, 2012 is a leap year.
But let's test a year right next to it, just to see how the log functions. Let's try 2013.
Sure. Divide 2013 by 33. The result is exactly 61. There is a remainder of 0.
And the rule explicitly states it must leave a non-zero remainder. So the year 2013 is not a leap year.
Exactly. If you map this mathematical rule out over a 33-year block, it creates exactly 8 leap years. They fall on years 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, and 32 of the cycle.
8 leap years per cycle. That is 7 distinct 4-year periods where the 4th year is a leap year, followed by 1 5-year period to close the loop at year 33. It creates this beautiful, pulsing mathematical rhythm.
But the rhythm is not just aesthetically pleasing. This is the major revelation in the historical documents. Dee didn't just invent a clever theological alternative. His math was objectively, astronomically better than the Pope's.
Wait, really? Let's look at those numbers again. You mentioned earlier the true astronomical solar year. The physical reality of the Earth's orbit between vernal equinoxes is 365.24238 days.
Yes, and the Gregorian calendar, the one you and I use today, averages out to 365.2425 days per year over its 400-year cycle. It's very close.
But what is John Dee's average?
Over his 33-year cycle, adding those 8 leap years, the average length of a year is exactly 365.2424 days.
365.2424 compared to the true physical year of 365.24238. John Dee's Protestant calendar was mathematically closer to the reality of the solar system than the one the entire global population eventually adopted.
It really was.
He literally beat the Pope at astronomical mathematics.
He created a system that would experience significantly less drift over the millennia.
But, I have to challenge this based on what we see later in the sources. If his math was so purely objectively superior, why did Dee insist on tying it to a highly specific physical location on Earth?
Yeah.
Because the sources reveal a very strange caveat to this calendar. Dee claimed it would keep the vernal equinox locked flawlessly on March 21st for 300 years, from 1580 to 1879, but only if you observe the equinox from exactly 77 degrees west longitude.
That is the genius and the geopolitical ambition of John Dee. He called this God's longitude. You see, Dee wasn't just interested in passive observation. He was an imperial architect.
Right.
The historian Simon Cassidy, whose work is central to these sources, proposes that this longitudinal anchor was a massive strategic play.
Because 77 degrees west is not in England. It is across the Atlantic Ocean.
It passes directly through the eastern coast of North America. Cassidy argues that Dee's secret plan for Queen Elizabeth was to establish a covert colony perfectly situated on that 77-degree meridian. Once this foothold was secured, they would unveil the 33-year calendar to the world. They would declare that their calendar tracked the life of Christ, held truer to the physical heavens than the popes, and functioned in absolute perfection from their new, divinely ordained American empire.
It is the ultimate flex. We understand time and space better than Rome, and we have the colony to prove it. This completely recontextualizes the Roanoke expeditions and the early English push into North America.
It really does.
They weren't just looking for gold. They were looking for the exact meridian where their mathematical model of time became perfect.
And if you trace that 77-degree line on a map today, the historical echoes are staggering.
The sources explicitly point this out, and it gave me chills reading it. If you look at the master plan for Washington, D.C., laid out by Pierre L'Enfant around 1790, he designated the U.S. Capitol building as the 0-degree meridian for the new United States.
Right.
But if you measure the global longitude of that exact building today, it sits precisely at 77 degrees, 0 minutes west.
God's longitude.
A flawlessly accurate 33-year temporal cycle, anchored to the exact meridian that would eventually become the legislative seat of the American empire. I mean, it implies a multi-generational, almost impossibly deep awareness of these temporal and spatial coordinates among the era's greatest thinkers.
Which brings us to a crucial shift in our deep dive. Because this obsession with the numbers 33 and 77, and this intense desire to build mathematical structures that flawlessly track the reality of the universe, it did not stop at astronomy and cartography.
No, it didn't.
In the Elizabethan worldview, all truth was unified, and we see these exact mathematical principles deployed in the era's most significant literary puzzle.
The sonnets. We are pivoting now to the cryptological tables, the true and mathematical documents provided in our sources. And I need to set a strict boundary for you listening. We are looking at the mathematics of the sonnets as an isolated internal engine.
Yes, that's critical.
We are not comparing the sonnets to the Gregorian calendar at all. We are strictly analyzing how the sonnets utilize the mathematical philosophies of Dr. John Dee's 33-year cycle.
These sources do not treat the sonnets simply as a collection of 154 emotional poems about love, time, and decay. They treat the text as an engineered dataset, a 14-tiered mathematical pyramid.
Okay, let's unpack the structure of this pyramid, starting with the exact line count. The sources state this pyramid contains exactly 2,155 lines of text.
Right.
Now, if you were doing the math in your head, a standard sonnet is 14 lines. 154 sonnets times 14 lines equals 2,156 lines. So how do the sources arrive at 2,155?
This is where we see the intentionality of the engineering. The author of the sonnets breaks their own structural rules in two very specific places. Sonnet 99 is written with 15 lines instead of 14.
Okay, so that adds 1 line.
Exactly. But Sonnet 126 is written with only 12 lines. That removes 2 lines.
So 2,156 plus 1 minus 2 leaves you with exactly 2,155 lines.
It is a mathematically deliberate anomaly, The poet is signaling that the total line count is a rigid, engineered boundary, not just the byproduct of writing 154 standard poems. 2,155 is the finite universe of this mathematical model.
And holding up this 2,155-line universe are what the cryptological tables call the prime pillars, three foundational numbers 7, 11, and 13. Let's look at how each of these operates as a structural mechanism. What does the number 11 do?
Well, the sources refer to 11 as the structural lock. If we visualize the 154 sonnets arranged in a pyramid, the tables arrange them with exactly 11 sonnets per tier, creating 14 horizontal tiers.
Because 11 times 14 is 154.
Precisely. Because 11 divides perfectly into the total number of poems, it creates a rigid grid. There's no fractional remainder. It locks the horizontal structure of the entire work in place.
So 11 is the rigid casing. It holds the boundaries, but the number 13 operates completely differently.
It does.
The tables call 13 the rhythm anchor, producing a residual drift signature. That sounds incredibly technical. How does a reader actually experience a drift signature in poetry?
Think of it like a polyrhythm in music. The main beat is the 14-line sonnet. But if you map a secondary rhythm based on the number 13 across a collection, it doesn't fit perfectly. 154 divided by 13 is 11, with the remainder of 11. That fractional remainder is the drift.
Meaning the 13 rhythm doesn't align with the ending of the book. It constantly resets at slightly off-kilter intervals.
Exactly. It might manifest as thematic shifts, or recurring vocabulary popping up every 13th poem. It creates a dynamic heartbeat, a pulsing rhythm beneath the rigid 11 lock. It ensures the mathematical structure feels alive, mimicking the slightly imperfect cycles of nature itself.
And finally, the third pillar, the number 7.
7 is universally resonant. It ties the abstract math back to the physical human experience of time, the 7 days of the week. But more importantly, the ciphertexts highlight repeating 77-line structures woven throughout the sonnets based on this 7 base.
77. There is God's longitude again. The geographic anchor of Dee's calendar reappearing as a structural anchor in the poetry.
The geometric echoes across these disciplines are impossible to ignore.
So let's look at the mechanism of these three pillars working together. If 11 is the rigid casing, 13 is the internal heartbeat, and 7 ties it to human time. What happens when these gears interlock? If you multiply the prime pillars 7 times 11 times 13, the mathematical product is exactly 1001.
The 1001 master key.
The sources argue that this is the master mathematical equation unifying the entire architecture of the sonnets, but I have to push back here.
Sure.
As someone who loves poetry, how do we know this isn't just apophenia? I mean, the human brain is hardwired to find patterns in chaos. Couldn't a genius poet just write a brilliant, emotionally devastating sequence of poems, and historians centuries later simply overlay prime numbers onto it until they find an equation that looks cool?
It is a valid skepticism and honestly essential when dealing with cryptology. But the sources argue against accidental pattern recognition by demonstrating how the 1001 key integrates with external, astronomically fixed data sets.
Like what?
Specifically, the structure of the physical year. The math becomes too complex and too perfectly integrated to be an accident of raw emotion. The author was actively subjecting the raw material of language to the rigorous constraints of mathematics.
They were engineering time with words. To prove this to you, the listener, we have to put this 1001 master key to the test. We're going to collide the hidden code of the sonnets with the physical solar year, using Dr. John Dee's favorite calendrical engine, the 33-year cycle.
And to do this, the true mathematical tables direct us to look at the temporal milestones of the solar year, the quarter days.
This is straightforward astronomy. If you take the standard 364-day base year model used in these historical ciphers and divide it into 4 equal quarters, you get 4 highly specific hinge points.
Quarter 1 ends on day 91, quarter 2 ends on day 182, quarter 3 ends on day 273, and quarter 4 ends on day 364.
Day 91, 182, 273, and 364. These roughly correspond to the solstices and equinoxes, the physical anchors of the Earth's orbit.
Right. Now we apply the mathematical filter John Dee's perfect calendar. We multiply these physical solar quarter days by the 33-year cycle.
Let's walk through the math. Quarter 1, 91 days. 91 multiplied by 33 equals 3003.
Quarter 2, 182 days. 182 multiplied by 33 equals 6006.
Quarter 3, 273 days. 273 multiplied by 33 equals 9009.
And quarter 4, 364 days. 364 multiplied by 33 equals 2012.
3003, 6006, 9009, 2012. Let me lay out what we're looking at here because the integration is flawless. Look at these results compared to the master key of the sonnets, 1001.
It's amazing.
3003 is exactly 3 times 1001. 6006 is exactly 6 times 1001. 9009 is exactly 9 times 1001. And 12 is exactly 12 times 1001.
By multiplying the physical quarters of the solar year by John Dee's ideal 33-year calendar, you automatically generate a perfect geometric progression, 3, 6, 9, 12. That is an exact multiple of the 1001 master key built from the 7, 11, and 13 pillars of the sonnets.
Yeah.
It proves that the structure of the physical year, the theoretical perfection of Dee's calendar, and the hidden architecture of the poems are a single unified equation.
Now, wait a minute. I need to jump in here to clarify something that might be incredibly confusing. If I am listening to this and looking at my copy of the sonnets, I might be flipping through trying to find line 9009 to see what the big secret is. But we just established earlier that there are only 2,155 lines in the entire text. How can 9009 be a crucial part of the cipher if the text isn't even that long?
That is a critical distinction to make. 3003, 6006, 9009, and 2012 are purely mathematical products. They are geometric coordinates of the cipher's atmosphere. They are explicitly not line numbers in the text.
Let's be absolutely clear here so you don't get lost in the numbers. 3003, 6006, 9009, and 1012 are mathematical products, not line numbers. The entire sonnets collection only contains 2,155 lines.
Exactly.
It's like GPS coordinates on a map. The lines of latitude and longitude don't physically exist as trenches carved into the dirt of the earth. They are an abstract mathematical grid hovering above the physical space that allows you to navigate it perfectly.
An excellent analogy. The 1001 master key and its geometric progressions are the mathematical atmosphere overlaying the poetry. But your question leads directly to the ultimate reveal in these sources. If the 33 multiplier creates these abstract atmospheric coordinates, where does the physical text actually anchor to the physical days of the year? Where does the math touch the paper?
And the sources point us specifically to the third quarter climax, the temporal hinge point of day 273.
We must set the abstract multiplier aside for a moment and look at the physical reality of the poem's structure. We know day 273 represents the physical end of the third quarter of the solar year. We have to map that day onto the 2,155-line structure of the sonnets.
When you trace the 14-tiered pyramid mapped out in the tables, and you follow the days of the year corresponding to the lines of the text, day 273 lands on a highly specific physical location.
Lines 1617 and 1618.
Lines 1617 and 1618.
These two physical lines sit precisely at the end of the third quarter of the cyclical structure mapped in the source's pyramid. They are the physical anchor point for the temporal milestone.
The constraint required to achieve this is staggering. Imagine the psychological pressure of trying to write an emotional, historically enduring piece of literature. You have to write fluidly, beautifully, exploring the deepest vulnerabilities of the human heart.
Right.
But your pen is completely chained to an astronomical grid. You have to carefully engineer the anomalies, like dropping 2 lines in Sonnet 126, just to ensure that the exact mathematical transition of the solar year's third quarter lands precisely on lines 1617 and 1618.
The sheer intellectual weight of this achievement cannot be overstated. What these sources reveal is a complete fusion of John Dee's calendrical precision with absolute linguistic mastery. Lines 1617 and 1618 are not just verse, they act as a literal, physical, temporal juncture in the text.
They prove the sonnets were built to serve as a working calendar, a literal mechanism to track time and philosophical truth simultaneously. It is a scientific instrument perfectly disguised as a book of love songs.
It completely redefines what we consider literature in the Elizabethan context.
Yeah.
We tend to put the poet in one box and the astronomer in another.
Right, completely separate.
But in the world of John Dee, poetry, mathematics, astronomy, and calendar reform were not separate disciplines. They were a single, unified language of truth. To understand the universe, you had to speak all of its languages at once. The structure of a poem was as critical and as rigidly governed by divine math as the orbit of a planet.
Which leaves us with a profound realization as we wrap up this deep dive. We started this journey by talking about the clock on your wall, the expectation that the grid we place over time is exactly what it seems.
Yeah.
We discovered how John Dee engineered a 33-year cycle that was more astronomically perfect than the Gregorian calendar, and how he tied it to the exact longitude of the future U.S. Capitol building.
It's wild to think about.
We saw how that same 33-year mathematical philosophy was used to forge the 1001 master key inside Shakespeare's sonnets, generating the 3003, 6006, 9009, and 12012 geometric progressions, and physically anchoring the solar year at lines 1617 and 1618.
Everything connects.
It does. So I want to leave you with a final lingering question to mull over as you look around your own space today. If someone in the 16th century could encode an astronomically perfect calendar geometry into the most famous poetry ever written, what other masterpieces sitting on your bookshelf right now are actually disguised scientific instruments waiting to be decoded?
It definitely makes you want to read everything a little closer.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because maybe the calendar isn't broken, maybe we just forgot how to read the math. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.